Everyone in the office thought I was the new secretary, the quiet girl who brought the coffee, the one who took the notes and filed the papers and never said very much, the one who sat at the small desk outside the big glass office and smiled politely and did as she was told. They had no idea. They had no idea that every single night, when the office emptied and the lights went dark, I went home to the most powerful man in the entire building. Because the boss they all feared, the great and cold Nathan Cross, chief executive of Cross Industries, was not my boss. He was my husband, and no one in the whole company knew. Let me explain how this happened, because it is not a simple story, and it did not begin as a game. It began as a trap that Nathan and I set together to catch someone who was trying to destroy him. My name is Grace, and 2 years ago, I married Nathan Cross in secret. We did not mean for it to be a secret at first. We fell in love quietly, the two of us, away from the noise of his enormous life. Nathan was a private man, guarded and serious, a man who had learned long ago that in his world, everyone wanted something from him. His money, his power, his name. He trusted almost no one, but somehow he trusted me. And I loved him, not for any of the things the world wanted from him, but for the tired, lonely, gentle man he was when all the masks came off. I want to tell you how we met, because it matters. It matters that I did not marry Nathan Cross for his money, because almost everyone who heard our story later assumed that I had. I met Nathan in a small bookshop on a rainy afternoon. I did not know who he was. He was standing in the poetry section, alone, reading, with rain on his coat. And he looked so tired and so sad that my heart went out to him before I ever knew his name. We reached for the same book at the same time, an old collection of poems, and we both laughed, and he let me have it, and then he asked, shyly, if I would let him buy me a coffee to make up for it. I said yes, and we sat in a little cafe for 3 hours, and we talked. And I did not find out until the very end that the gentle, lonely man across the table was one of the most powerful men in the country. When he finally told me, nervously, watching my face to see if it would change, I just laughed and said, well, that explains the expensive coat. And something in him relaxed, all at once, as if he had been holding his breath. Later he told me it was that moment he knew. That I had looked at him and seen a man, not a fortune. That I was perhaps the only person in his whole adult life who had. We married in a tiny ceremony, just the two of us and 2 witnesses, on a quiet morning by the sea. And we agreed, for the time being, to keep it private. Nathan's world was full of sharks, and he wanted to protect me from it. Once things are settled, he said. Once I know it's safe, we'll tell the world. I'll put you on my arm at every event, and I won't care what anyone thinks. But not yet, my love. Let me keep you safe a little longer. I did not mind the secret. I did not care about being seen. I only cared about him. And so I agreed, never dreaming what that secret would one day allow me to do. So for a while, I was Nathan's secret wife. I lived in his beautiful home. I loved him. And the world of Cross Industries knew nothing about me at all. And then, the trouble began. Nathan started to notice that things were going wrong at his company. Secret plans were leaking to his competitors. Deals that should have been certain were falling apart at the last moment, as if someone were whispering his every move to his enemies. Confidential documents were appearing in the wrong hands. Someone inside Cross Industries, someone high up, someone he trusted, was betraying him. It was worse than simple theft. Because Nathan learned, slowly and with growing dread, that all of it was connected to one man, a ruthless corporate raider named Victor Kane. Victor Kane made his fortune by destroying companies. He would find a weakness, buy up shares in secret, plant traitors inside, and then launch a hostile takeover, seizing control, firing everyone, and selling the pieces for profit. And Victor Kane, Nathan realized, had set his sights on Cross Industries, Nathan's company, the company his father had built, the company that employed 3,000 people who trusted him to protect their jobs. Victor Kane had a spy inside Cross Industries. Someone on Nathan's own executive team was feeding Victor everything he needed to take the whole company apart. And Nathan did not know who it was. That was the problem. He was surrounded by people who smiled at him and called him a friend, and one of them was a traitor, and he could not tell which. He could not investigate openly because the moment the traitor knew he was suspected, they would cover their tracks, and the evidence would vanish. He needed someone on the inside, someone invisible, someone no one would ever suspect, someone who could sit quietly in the middle of everything, watching, listening, gathering the truth, while everyone ignored her completely. He needed a spy of his own. And one night, over dinner, as he told me about his troubles, his tired face grey with worry, I put down my fork and I said the words that changed everything. "Then let me do it," I said. "No one at your company knows who I am. No one has ever seen my face. I could walk into Cross Industries tomorrow as a total stranger. Hire me, Nathan, as a secretary. Put me right outside your office in the middle of everything where I can see and hear it all. No one suspects the secretary. No one even looks at the secretary. They'll say anything in front of her." I took his hand. "Let me catch your traitor for you. From the inside." Nathan refused at first. He said it was too dangerous. Victor Kane was a ruthless man, and the people who worked for him were dangerous, and he could not bear the thought of me anywhere near them. We argued about it for a week, but in the end, he could not deny the truth of it. It was a good plan. It was perhaps the only plan that could work, and so, reluctantly, and with a promise from me that I would only watch and listen and never, ever put myself in danger, Nathan agreed. We built my cover carefully, a false name for the records, a simple background, and then, on a grey Monday morning, I walked into the towering headquarters of Cross Industries, my heart pounding, and I began my new life as Grace Miller, the new secretary to the chief executive. The plan was simple. In public, Nathan and I were strangers. He was the cold, distant boss. I was the quiet, unimportant secretary. We would pass each other in the halls without a flicker of recognition, and all the while I would be watching everyone around him, listening to everything, searching for the traitor who was trying to destroy the man I loved. It was the strangest thing in the world, those first days. To sit outside my own husband's office and call him Mr. Cross. To bring him his coffee and have him thank me coolly, formally, as if we had never met, while his eyes, for just a flicker of a second, softened with a warmth that no one else could see. To watch him lead meetings, powerful and commanding, and know that this same man had held me in his arms that very morning and kissed me goodbye at our own front door. We had to be so careful. A single look held too long, a single word too warm, and someone might have wondered. So we became actors, both of us, playing the parts of strangers all day long. It was a kind of torture, honestly, to be so close to him and yet forced to pretend we were nothing to each other. Once he passed my desk and his hand brushed mine as he took a document, just for a second, and it was the only touch we would share until nightfall, and it sent a jolt through me like lightning. We learned to say everything with nothing. A tiny nod. A particular way of setting down a coffee cup, a note left in a file that only he would find that said, in careful handwriting, "I love you, be careful today." Secret messages passed in plain sight in a building full of people who had no idea that the boss and his secretary went home to the same bed. At night, we would go home separately, by different routes, and meet at the house. And finally, behind closed doors, we could be ourselves again. Nathan would pull me into his arms and ask me everything I had seen and heard that day, and I would tell him, and together we would try to piece together the mystery. It was frightening, but it was also, in a strange way, thrilling. We were partners, a team, fighting together to save everything he had built. But there was one thing about my new life that I had not expected, one thing that was harder than all the rest: the way they treated the secretary. I had never understood before what it was to be invisible, to be nobody. I had married into Nathan's world of wealth and power, and although I had never cared for it, I had grown used to being treated with a certain respect. But as Grace Miller, the new secretary, I was no one. And I learned very quickly exactly how the powerful people of Cross Industries treated someone they considered beneath them. Most of them simply ignored me. I was furniture. I brought their coffee and they did not look at me. I held doors, and they walked through without a word. They spoke about their private affairs in front of me as if I could not hear, as if I were not even a person, which was, of course, exactly what made me so useful. But one of them did not ignore me. One of them went out of her way to make my life miserable. Her name was Vanessa Reed. Vanessa was one of Nathan's most senior executives, a vice president. Beautiful, brilliant, and cold as ice. She was ambitious in a way that frightened me. The kind of ambition that has no limits, that would step on anyone and anything to climb higher. And Vanessa Reed had two great ambitions in life. The first was to rise to the very top of Cross Industries. And the second, I realized very quickly, was to marry Nathan Cross. Vanessa was in love with Nathan, or rather, she was in love with what marrying Nathan would make her. She had decided long ago that she would one day be Mrs. Cross, that she would stand at the top of that company with Nathan's ring on her finger and his empire at her feet. She had been circling him for years, I learned, flattering him, positioning herself, waiting for her moment. And she did not know, could not have imagined, that the quiet secretary she treated like dirt was already Mrs. Cross. That the ring she dreamed of was already on my finger, hidden on a chain around my neck, tucked out of sight beneath my plain secretary's blouse. Vanessa hated me from the first day. I think she sensed, with the instinct of a predator, that Nathan's eyes softened when I was near, even though he hid it well. She could not understand it, and it enraged her. So she made me her target. She would summon me to fetch things and then send me back because they were wrong. She would criticize my work in front of others, loudly, cruelly, though my work was flawless. She would accidentally spill coffee and make me clean it up. Once, in front of a whole room of executives, she looked me up and down and said, "Honestly, Nathan, where do you find these girls? This one can barely string a sentence together. You really should let me handle the hiring." And everyone laughed, and Nathan's jaw tightened. And I stood there in my plain blouse and said nothing, because I could not say anything, because our whole plan depended on my silence. That was the hardest part. Not the work, not the fear, but standing there, day after day, being humiliated by this cruel, ambitious woman and being unable to defend myself, being unable to say the words that burned in my throat. You are being cruel to the wife of the man you are trying to seduce. You are humiliating the woman who owns half of everything you are standing on. You have no idea who I am. There was one evening that was harder than all the others. Vanessa was hosting a small dinner for some important clients, and she needed a server, and she chose me. Deliberately. She made me wear a plain black serving uniform and carry trays of drinks to her guests all evening while she sat at the head of the table in a gown that cost more than a car, laughing, radiant, powerful. At one point, she called me over in front of everyone, and she looked me up and down slowly, and she said, "You know, you're not entirely useless, girl. You have a certain quiet quality. Some men like that. Perhaps one day, if you're lucky, some junior clerk will marry you and take you off our hands." And the whole table laughed, and I stood there, holding a tray of champagne, in my serving uniform, being told that I might one day be lucky enough to marry a clerk. If only she had known that I was already married to the man she herself was hunting. That the ring she would have killed for was hanging, that very moment, on a chain against my heart, hidden beneath my uniform, inches from where she stood. I said, "Thank you, Ms. Reed," and I refilled the champagne and I went back to serving. But that night, at home, I cried. And Nathan held me. and he was so angry he could barely speak. "I'll end this," he said. "Tomorrow I'll pull you out. No company, no plan is worth this." "No," I told him, wiping my eyes. "No. Do you understand what today told me? It told me exactly what Vanessa is. A woman who treats a powerless girl like that, purely for her own amusement, is a woman capable of anything, of betraying you, of destroying 3,000 jobs for her own ambition. I am more certain than ever that she is the traitor, and I am going to prove it. Let her laugh at the secretary a little longer, Nathan. Because the secretary is going to be the last thing she ever laughs at." But I said nothing to Vanessa, not a word, because we were hunting a traitor, and I could not risk everything for my own pride. And then, one afternoon, everything changed, because I began to suspect that the cruel woman who was making my life a misery and the traitor who was trying to destroy my husband might be one and the same person. It started with a phone call I was not meant to hear. I was filing papers in the small records room next to Vanessa's office. The door between the rooms was open just a crack, and I heard Vanessa's voice, low and careful, on the phone. A voice completely different from the confident, commanding voice she used in meetings. A secret voice. "It's moving forward," she was saying. "He still doesn't suspect anything. I have access to everything he sees. The board vote is in 6 weeks. By then you'll have enough shares to force the takeover, and I'll make sure the board has lost all confidence in him." A pause. "And you remember our arrangement, Victor? When you take control, I run the company. That was the deal." Victor. I went completely still, a stack of papers frozen in my hands. Victor Kane. She was talking to Victor Kane. Vanessa Reed, Nathan's own vice president, the woman who wanted to marry him, was the traitor. She was feeding everything to Victor Kane. She was helping him steal the company. And her reward was to run it herself, once Nathan had been destroyed. I had found the spy. It was her. It had been her all along. My hands were shaking. I made myself keep filing, quietly, normally, as if I had heard nothing at all. And I listened to the rest of the call, memorizing every word. And when Vanessa finally hung up, I finished my filing, and I walked out of that records room with my heart hammering, carrying the most important secret of my life. That night, I told Nathan everything, and I watched his face turn to stone. "Vanessa," he said quietly, "I trusted her. For 6 years I trusted her." He shook his head. "She's been in every meeting. She's seen every document. If she's feeding it all to Kane, then he knows everything, every weakness, every plan." He looked at me, and there was fear in his eyes, real fear. "Grace, if the board vote goes against me, I lose the company. Everything my father built, 3,000 jobs, all of it, gone." "Then we stop her," I said. "We have 6 weeks. We know she's the traitor now. We know the plan. That's more than we had this morning. We can use it." I took his hands. "But we have to be clever, Nathan. We can't just accuse her. She'll deny it. She'll cover her tracks, and it'll be your word against hers, and the board is already losing confidence in you. We need proof. Solid, undeniable proof. And I'm the only one who can get it. Because I'm the one she doesn't suspect." Nathan did not like it. He wanted to protect me, to pull me out, to handle it himself. But he knew, as I knew, that I was the only weapon he had. So once again, reluctantly, he agreed. And I went back to my little desk the next morning, the quiet secretary, and I began the most dangerous part of the whole plan. I began to gather proof against Vanessa Reed. It was terrifying work. Over the following weeks, I became a spy in earnest. I watched Vanessa's every move. I noticed when she stayed late, and I found reasons to stay late too. I paid attention to which documents she accessed, which calls she made, which meetings she took behind closed doors. And slowly, carefully, I gathered evidence. I found the secret email account she used to contact Kane when she left it open on her screen for 30 seconds while she took a call. I found records of share purchases hidden in shell companies, traced back, thread by thread, to accounts connected to Vanessa. I found, most damning of all, a folder of confidential cross-industries documents that she had copied and prepared to send to Kane, documents that would have handed him the final pieces he needed. I learned to be two people at once in those weeks. On the surface, I was Grace Miller, the meek, forgettable secretary, who fetched the coffee and dropped her eyes and never caused any trouble. But underneath, every moment of every day, I was watching. I was a hunter, wearing the skin of a mouse. I noticed everything. Which floor Vanessa went to when she thought no one was looking. The particular way she held her phone against her chest when a certain kind of call came in. The locked drawer in her desk. The times she asked to be left alone with confidential board matters. 100 tiny details that meant nothing on their own, but which, put together, told the whole story of her betrayal. And I had one great advantage that no professional investigator could ever have had. I was invisible. Vanessa and everyone else spoke freely in front of me, because to them I did not exist. I was a piece of office furniture that happened to pour coffee. They said things in front of me that they would never have said in front of an equal. They left documents on desks that they would never have left in front of a rival. My very powerlessness was my greatest weapon. The less they thought of me, the more they showed me. And I gathered it all. Every night I brought what I found home to Nathan, and together we built the case, spreading the papers across our dining table, piecing the puzzle together late into the night. And every day, I went back and sat outside his office and smiled politely, and brought the coffee and let Vanessa humiliate me, all while quietly, patiently, assembling the evidence that would destroy her. It was exhausting, living those two lives. There were nights I was so tired I could barely stand. But every time I wanted to give up, I thought about Nathan's face and the 3,000 people whose jobs depended on him, and I kept going. But Vanessa was clever, and as the weeks passed and the board vote drew closer, she began to grow suspicious. Not of me, exactly. She would never suspect the secretary. But she sensed that something was wrong, that her plan was not as secret as she believed. She became careful, watchful, and I knew that I was running out of time. And then came the day it almost all fell apart. I was in Vanessa's office, alone, late in the evening, copying the final piece of evidence I needed onto a small memory stick. Everyone had gone home. Nathan was waiting for me at the house. I thought I was safe. I thought I was alone. I was wrong. The door opened, and Vanessa Reed walked in. She stopped when she saw me, standing at her desk, at her computer, where I had no reason to be. And her beautiful cold face went very still. "What?" she said slowly. "Are you doing at my computer, secretary?" My heart stopped. The memory stick was in the computer. Everything was on it, every piece of evidence. If she saw it, if she understood, then the whole plan was over, and Nathan would lose everything, and I would be exposed, and I did not know what a woman like Vanessa, working for a man like Victor Kane, might do to protect her scheme. In that instant, 100 thoughts flew through my mind. If she looked at the screen, if she saw the files open, if she pulled the memory stick and read what was on it, then it was over. Not just the plan, everything. Nathan would lose the company. Vanessa would win. And I did not know what a woman working for a man like Victor Kane might do to a secretary who had discovered too much, alone, in an empty building, late at night, with no one to hear. I had to think fast. Faster than I had ever thought in my life. My whole body wanted to run, or to freeze, or to blurt out the truth. Instead, I made myself small. I made myself stupid. I became, completely, the harmless little secretary she believed me to be, because that disguise, the one that had humiliated me for 6 weeks, was now the only thing that could save me. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Reed," I said, and I made my voice small and frightened and stupid, the voice of the timid secretary she believed me to be. "The cleaning staff said one of the computers on this floor was making a strange noise, and Mr. Cross asked me to check them all before I left, and I didn't touch anything, I promise. I was just looking at the screen to see if..." I let my lip tremble. Please don't tell Mr. Cross I was in your office. I'll get in such trouble. I'm so sorry. I watched Vanessa study my face. I watched her decide whether to believe me. It was the longest moment of my life. My whole future, Nathan's whole future, 3,000 jobs, all of it, balanced on whether this cruel, clever woman believed that I was as stupid and harmless as I pretended to be, and then, slowly, her face relaxed into contempt. Because, of course, the pathetic little secretary was too foolish and frightened to be a threat. What else could she possibly be? Get out, Vanessa said coldly. And don't ever let me catch you in my office again, stupid girl. Yes, Ms. Reed. Thank you, Ms. Reed. I'm so sorry. And I pulled the memory stick from the computer, hidden in my palm, and I gathered my things with shaking hands, and I walked out of that office with the final piece of evidence, and Vanessa Reed never knew how close she had come to catching me. She just watched me go, with contempt in her eyes, certain, absolutely certain, that I was nobody. That was her mistake. It was the same mistake she had made every single day. She looked at me, and she saw nobody. She was about to find out exactly who I was. I got home that night, and I fell into Nathan's arms, still shaking, and I told him what had happened, and he held me so tightly I could barely breathe, and he said we were done, that I was never going back, that it was too dangerous. But I had the evidence. All of it. Complete. Undeniable. And the board vote was in 3 days. We had everything we needed. Now we just needed the right moment to use it, and I knew exactly when that moment should be. The board meeting, I said. In 3 days. When Vanessa stands up in front of the whole board to move against you, to force the takeover, to hand the company to Kane. That's when we do it. That's when the truth comes out. In front of everyone. And Nathan. I looked at him. I want to be the one to reveal it. I want to walk into that room, the secretary everyone ignores. And I want to lay the evidence on the table. And I want Vanessa Reed to look up and finally understand who I am. Nathan looked at me for a long time. And then, slowly, he smiled. The first real smile I had seen on his face in weeks. My wife, he said softly, is the most magnificent woman in the world. The day of the board meeting arrived. It was held in the great boardroom at the top of the Cross Industries Tower, a vast room with glass walls and a view over the whole city. The full board was there, 12 powerful men and women who would decide the fate of the company. Nathan was there, at the head of the table, calm and controlled, though I alone knew the fear beneath his calm. And Vanessa was there, radiant and confident, dressed to command, certain that this was her moment of triumph. I was there too, as the secretary, sitting quietly in a chair against the wall with a folder in my lap, ready to take the notes, ignored by every single person in the room, exactly as I had planned. The meeting began. And it went, at first, exactly as Vanessa intended. She rose to her feet, and she began to speak, and she was magnificent, I will give her that. She spoke about Nathan's failures, about leaked deals, and lost confidence, and a company adrift. She never mentioned that she herself had caused every one of those failures. She painted a picture of a chief executive who had lost control, and she proposed, smoothly, reasonably, that the board had no choice but to support the offer on the table. An offer from an outside investor, a man who could bring stability, a man named Victor Kane. I watched the faces of the board members, and I watched them being persuaded. I watched the doubt spreading. Vanessa was winning. She was actually winning. In a few more minutes, the board would vote, and they would vote to hand Cross Industries to Victor Kane, and everything would be lost. Nathan glanced at me. Just once. A tiny glance that no one else noticed. It was time. I stood up. For a moment, no one even reacted because secretaries do not stand up in board meetings. Vanessa kept talking. And then, slowly, as I walked toward the great table, folder in hand, the room began to fall silent, everyone turning to look at the strange sight of the quiet secretary walking to the head of the table as if she belonged there. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said. My voice was clear and steady and did not shake at all. "But before the board votes, I think everyone in this room should see something." Vanessa stared at me, her mouth open. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped. "Sit down, get out. This is a board meeting, you stupid little." "Ms. Reed," I said calmly. "I would stop talking now if I were you." And I opened the folder and I began to lay the evidence on the table, one piece at a time, in front of the entire board. The secret emails to Victor Kane, the hidden share purchases traced back to Vanessa, the confidential documents she had stolen, the recording of her phone call, arranging the takeover, promising to destroy Nathan, naming her reward. Piece by piece by piece, I laid it all out on that great table, in front of 12 shocked faces, and I watched Vanessa Reed's world collapse in real time. "For 6 weeks," I said to the board, "I have been gathering this evidence. Vanessa Reed is not trying to save this company. She is trying to steal it. She is Victor Kane's spy inside Cross Industries. Every failure Mr. Cross has suffered, she caused. Every leaked deal, she leaked. And her reward, when Kane takes control and destroys 3,000 jobs, is to run what remains. It is all here. Every word of it. Documented. Proven. Undeniable." As I laid down each piece, I watched Vanessa's face change. First confusion, then disbelief, then a growing, dawning horror as she recognized her own secret emails, her own hidden accounts, her own stolen documents, laid out one by one in front of the people she had hoped to rule. She had been so certain, so completely certain, right up until this moment, that she was winning, that she was untouchable, that the girl she had humiliated for 6 weeks was nobody, and that nobody was any threat to her at all. And now she watched that nobody calmly, methodically destroy her in front of the entire board of Cross Industries, and she could not understand how it was happening because it was impossible, because the secretary was nobody, and nobody could do this to her. The board erupted. Vanessa was on her feet, screaming that it was lies, a forgery, a conspiracy, that I was a madwoman, that they should call security. But the evidence was there, on the table, for everyone to see, and it was too complete, too detailed, too real to be denied. And the more she screamed, the more guilty she looked, and the quieter and calmer I stayed, the more the board believed me. Because the truth does not need to shout, only lies need to shout. The truth can simply lie there on the table, in black and white, and wait. And then one of the board members, an old man who had served alongside Nathan's father, held up his hand and the room fell quiet, and he looked at me with narrowed, curious eyes. "Young woman," he said, "this is extraordinary work, but I have to ask, who are you? You're a secretary. Why would a secretary spend 6 weeks risking everything to investigate a vice president? Why would you do this?" And there it was, the question, the moment. I looked at Nathan, and Nathan looked at me, and he gave me the smallest nod. It was time. Finally, after 2 years of secrecy, it was time. The whole room was silent, waiting. Vanessa had gone very still, staring at me with a dawning, horrified confusion, as if she was seeing me clearly for the very first time, as if some terrible understanding were beginning to break over her, though she could not yet name it. I let the silence stretch. 2 years of it, 6 weeks of humiliation. All of it coming down to this single moment. I reached up to my neck and I drew out the chain that I always wore hidden beneath my blouse, and on the end of it hung a ring. A wedding ring, set with a single diamond. The ring Nathan had placed on my finger on that quiet morning by the sea. I slipped it onto my finger where it belonged, where it had always belonged, and I held up my hand so that the whole board could see it catch the light. "Because," I said, "Nathan Cross is my husband. My name is Grace Cross. We were married 2 years ago. I am not the secretary." I let that land in the stunned silence. I went undercover in my own husband's company, as a nobody. As a girl, everyone would ignore, because it was the only way to catch the person who was trying to destroy him. Vanessa Reed treated me like dirt for 6 weeks. She humiliated me. She never once imagined who I really was. I looked directly at Vanessa, and I finally said the words I had held in my throat for so long. You spent all this time trying to marry the man I'm already married to, and while you were busy despising the secretary caught you. Remember that. You lost everything because you decided I was nobody. Vanessa Reed had no words. Her face was white. She looked at the ring on my finger and at Nathan and at the evidence on the table, and she understood, at last, the completeness of her ruin. The board did not vote to hand the company to Victor Kane. The board voted instead to remove Vanessa Reed immediately and to refer the entire matter to the police and to give Nathan their full and grateful support. Victor Kane's takeover collapsed within the week once his inside spy was exposed and the authorities began to investigate. Cross Industries was saved. The 3,000 jobs were saved. And Nathan's father's company remained exactly where it belonged, in Nathan's hands. Vanessa Reed was arrested, along with Victor Kane, on charges of fraud and corporate espionage. Her career was over. Her ambitions, all of them, turned to ash. The last I saw of her, she was being led out of the building she had hoped to rule, past the desk of the secretary she had despised, and she could not even look at me. But I looked at her. I stood up from my little desk, one last time, and I stepped in front of her, and I made her stop. And I said just one thing to her, not cruelly. I did not need to be cruel. I simply said, "You served me champagne once and told me I might be lucky enough to marry a clerk one day. Do you remember?" She said nothing. Her face was grey. "I have thought about that evening a great deal," I said. "And I've realized it was the moment I decided to destroy you. Not because of what you said to me, but because of what it told me about who you were. A person who is cruel to someone she believes is powerless will be cruel to anyone given the chance. That is the one thing you could never hide, Vanessa. Not from me. Kindness costs nothing, and you did not have even that much to spare." And then I stepped aside, and I let them lead her away, out of my life, forever. As for Nathan and me, we stopped hiding. That very evening, Nathan Cross announced to his company, and soon after to the world, that he was married. That he had been married for 2 years. That his wife was a woman named Grace, who had just, quietly and brilliantly, saved his entire company from destruction. And he did exactly what he had promised on that quiet morning by the sea. He put me on his arm at every event, and he held my hand in front of everyone. And he did not care one bit what anyone thought. The people at Cross Industries had to adjust, of course, to the strange news that the quiet secretary they had barely noticed was now, and had always been, the wife of the chief executive. Some of them were embarrassed, remembering how they had ignored me, or worse. But I held no grudges. I had never wanted their respect for being Nathan's wife. And besides, I understood now, better than anyone, exactly how it felt to be invisible. And I promised myself that I would never, ever look through another person the way I had been looked through. I do not work as a secretary anymore, obviously, but I did not simply become a decoration on Nathan's arm either. It turned out that I had a real gift for seeing what other people missed, for watching, for understanding the truth beneath the surface. So I took a real role in the company, a role I earned. I became the person Nathan trusted to sense trouble before it arrived, to read people, to protect the company from the sharks. The girl who had caught one traitor became very good at catching them all. Sometimes, at company events, a new employee will be introduced to me, and they will not know who I am, and they will treat me with that casual carelessness that people use for someone they think is no one important. And I never correct them, not right away. I just smile, and I am kind to them, and I remember. People sometimes ask me if I regret those weeks, the humiliation, the fear, the cruelty I had to endure in silence, and the honest answer is no, because those weeks gave me something I could never have gotten any other way. They gave me back to myself. When I married Nathan, I had begun, quietly, to lose myself, to become only the wife, a person defined entirely by the man beside her. But sitting at that little desk, invisible and alone, I discovered that I was clever, and brave, and strong, all on my own, with nothing but my own wits to rely on. I did not save that company because I was Nathan's wife. I saved it because I was Grace, and knowing that, truly knowing it, was worth every cruel word Vanessa Reed ever spoke to me. Because I learned the most important lesson of my life sitting at a small desk, being ignored by powerful people. I learned that you should never, ever decide that someone is nobody. That the quiet person in the corner, the one you overlook, the one you think does not matter, might be the most important person in the room, might be the one holding all the cards, might be the one who sees everything. The world is full of people who mistake gentleness for weakness, and quietness for stupidity, and kindness for foolishness. They are always wrong. And sometimes, if you are lucky, you get to watch them find out just how wrong they were. Everyone thought I was the new secretary. They were wrong. I was the wife. I was the weapon. I was the one thing that ruthless, ambitious woman never saw coming. And by the time she finally looked closely enough to understand who I really was, it was already completely far too late. Nathan and I are still together, of course, happier than ever now that there are no more secrets. We still go back sometimes to that little bookshop where we met on rainy afternoons, and we stand in the poetry section and pretend to reach for the same book at the same time, and we laugh because we are foolish and in love and always will be. He is not cold anymore, my Nathan, not with me. The tired, guarded man from the bookshop learned slowly that he could put his masks down and still be safe, and it changed him, softened him, made him whole. Sometimes, late in the evening, when the house is quiet, he takes my hand and looks at the ring on my finger, the one I wore hidden against my heart for so long, and he shakes his head in wonder. "You saved everything," he says. "My father's company, 3,000 people, me. You walked into that building as a nobody, and you saved all of it." And I always tell him the truth, that I did not do it because I was his wife. I did it because I could, because underneath the quiet, underneath the gentleness everyone mistook for weakness, I was strong all along. I just had not needed to know it until I did.